bear patiently the cross of grief or pain. Leave to thy God to order and provide. In every change he faithful will remain. Be still, my soul, thy best and heavenly friend. Through thorny ways leads to a joyful end. Be still, my soul, thy God doth undertake to guide the future as he has the past. Thy hope, thy confidence, let nothing shakes. All now mysterious shall be bright at last. Be still, my soul, the waves and winds still know his voice who ruled them while he dwelt below. In you I rest, in you I found my hope, in you I trust. You never let me go. I place my life within your hands alone. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. The hour is hastening on, when we shall be forever with the Lord. When disappointment, grief, and fear are gone, sorrow forgot, love's purest joys restored. Be still, my soul, when change and tears are past. All safe and blessed we shall meet at last. In you I rest, in you I found my hope, in you I trust. You never let me go. I place my life within your hands alone. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. Be still, my soul. God of all things, he says, be still, I know that I am God.
Good morning, Evergreen Online. This morning we are hosting our Mid-Lenten Park in the Church event on our Rosemead campus. However, today we are also going to be holding our emergency evacuation drill. With the recent events of the Monterey Park shooting, the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and now the tornado in Montebello just across the freeway from us, we thought it would be important for us to practice our evacuation routes. After the drill, we'll be having a delicious lunch of Vietnamese banh mi sandwiches. And so, if you didn't sign up but you'd still like to come by, we invite you to swing by after the drill, maybe at about 11 a.m., and you can join us for the fellowship time after. After the Monterey Park shooting, a bunch of local pastors started to gather for prayer and support as we looked to care for our congregations and the city. And what we've noticed is that it's been hard to address the grief that people are feeling, and it's been a struggle to find helpful ways that the church can actually help in the process of healing from such traumatic loss. One of the most creative ways that I've seen is from our very own Wendy Toda. Wendy, as many of you remember, shared some of her Tabiji Eggshell art pieces with us during the Advent season as a way to capture the process of walking through darkness and grief. Tabiji, of course, being the Japanese word for journey through. Now, after the Monterey Park shooting, Wendy created a whole new series of Tabiji Eggshell pieces as a way to process her own feelings of grief around the shooting. The Los Angeles Times picked up this story and this past week released a video feature of Wendy and her eggshells. It is a really wonderful feature, and if you haven't seen it, you can access it through the LA Times online or on YouTube, and we'll post the QR code later in the service so you can access the video. Now, Wendy has also created a short retreat experience where people can process their journey of grief through the creation of their very own Tabiji eggshells. On Tuesday, the staff was able to go through this experience with Wendy, and it was phenomenal. Here's one of the shells that I created, and you, of course, can ask the other staff to share with you their pieces as well. Now, yesterday we held another Tabiji retreat experience for our own congregation, and some of you were able to attend that on campus. This retreat yesterday was made possible largely by the Resonance Grant that we received earlier last year. Now, in April, Wendy will be holding a third Tabiji Eggshell retreat. This retreat in April will be exclusively for the city of Monterey Park and surrounding communities to process grief around the shooting. Evergreen will be partnering with Wendy because we believe this is an enormously important and meaningful offering that she is giving our neighbors and our neighborhood. Now, with all that Wendy is doing and with the recent LA Times feature, I thought it'd be just a great time to talk with Wendy. To talk with her about art, about grief, and about God demolishing walls. So here is my conversation with Wendy. Wendy, as we start, can you just tell us like a little bit? I know we know that you're an artist, but wondering if you just really quickly you can tell us about your background in art. How did you first get interested in art?
My earliest memory of art was when my mom gave me like huge paint brushes and paint and spread out newspaper on the kitchen floor and just let me paint all over these huge pieces of newspaper. And then I just kept gravitating towards art all through school. My beloved father wanted me to be a doctor, but I said, I can't handle the blood. So can I please be an artist? So it's just always been a part of what I've enjoyed doing, the craft of it, as well as the ideas behind it. So it became a good way to communicate. I used to be in design and advertising. That's what I studied in school, and swore I would never be a fine artist. I thought, no, that's not for me. And here I am, and I love it. So when my kids came, I had to decide, okay, clients, babies. And I didn't want to miss my kids' little years. So I told all my design clients, sorry, gotta go. And then slowly started finding myself moving towards the fine art side of things. And it was so different because I was used to having a client tell me what they wanted to say, and then I would say it for them. But with fine art, it's like, well, what do you want to say? Like, oh, I don't know. What do I want to say? And what does God want me to say? Oh, wow. So it was a very different way of approaching the creative process.
some of us know that, your journey has wound through different stages of grief or different seasons of grief. And as an artist, you come and you have this kind of experience of God working through grief. And so I'm wondering, like, how do you think God actually interacts with us through grief?
I think the whole Emmanuel thing, God with us, is probably the most powerful, because to know that, however your grief is being expressed at the moment, whatever place you're in, if you're angry, if you're sad, if you're numb, all of that, that God is just right there with you.
How has God used art to help you engage with your grief?
God's used art to help me engage with grief by giving me like a language or a way to express it, to name it. Because if I can make something concrete, that just helps me. Like, I can look at it and say, yes, that's what I feel. That's like with the Monterey Park Tabiji Eggshells. Once I could see them, it's like, yes, that's how I'm feeling. And it kind of also serves as almost like a little altar, or a little place of remembrance, to say, okay, that's where I am. And then maybe there's a stage where it's like, okay, I'm ready to move forward in a certain direction, and then the art can move forward with me. The whole Perspectacles body of work. So they're mixed media sculptures that is the size and shape of eyeglasses. And so they explore the ways we see or the ways we don't see. But that was all during a period of great grief. They're shown chronologically, so you can track over time. You can see the sorrow and you can see the grief, and then you can see it shift, or start to change. I think there's something for me about being able to make something concrete or do something concrete to embody the grief, so it isn't just a theoretical thing. It helps me to make something solid that I can hold.
Wendy, how do you see, from your perspective, how do you see God's demolishing of walls?
Oftentimes we think of demolition as like the big wrecking ball. I mean, that it's this, contact, it's that kind of thing. But I think another way that God does that is through this gentle love that kind of more dissolves than just kind of, smashes and makes into 1,000 pieces. But it's a slow dissolving thing. And so what happens is the structure just slowly starts to sink in. And so that's another way I think that demolition can happen, is through that kindness and that gentleness, and like the work that we did on Tuesday with just working with color and allowing whatever comes to come, that it wasn't a direct conflict. It was softer. So I think there are different flavors of demolition.
How does God break down that wall of emotional perfection, of feeling like you have to have, even emotionally, you have to have it all together?
That's so hard because it's so ingrained in our culture
It is.
to be that. But it's such a trap. Well, part of it is how we handle grief when we experience it. The main way I think that God builds compassion in us is when we go through grief or suffering. There's really no other way compassion or empathy gets built, because you have no understanding, right, of pain or of grief if you've never experienced it. But some of the people I know who've experienced incredible hardship are also the most compassionate people. But you have a choice, right? I mean, you can get hard and bitter, or you can allow God to build a depth and a softness in you. If we can walk well in our grief, we will be able to walk well with other people in their grief. Evergreen, first, for those who are grieving, I bless you with knowing that you are not alone, that God is bigger and more gentle and stronger than you can imagine, and that He is holding you. If I were to be holding an eggshell, That is how he holds you, just gently and tenderly and with great care, because he doesn't want you to break, right? Because he loves you. And that you would know that companionship, that God is with you. In time there will come a softness, and in time there will come a way forward, and you'll be able to carry your grief with you, and it will become a beautiful part of who you are. For my Evergreen family at large, may you be people who are unafraid of grief, unafraid of the mess and the non-linear quality that it has, and able to allow yourselves to go there and able to walk there with each other well, so that we can be a place where we don't have to be emotionally perfect and have it all together. So may we be a place where we can be fully human with each other, for each other, and to allow grief the space that it needs to be safe enough to be heard.
Amen.
Amen.
Now make sure you catch Wendy's feature in the LA Times after this devotional service, either at the LA Times Online or on YouTube. If you'd like to support Wendy's Tabiji workshop for the community in April, you can donate to help her purchase supplies for our neighbors through our church website. Just click on the Arts Community Fund in the drop box. And lastly, if all of this talk has made you interested in attending a Tabiji retreat for yourself, you can reserve a spot for her next retreat on Wendy's website, and you can find your way there through this QR code. Now this Lent, we've been in a sermon series called Divine Demolition, where we're asking the question, what does God want to deconstruct or dismantle in our faith? What walls does God want to demolish for our own good? And each week we've been looking at different walls that God is dismantling here at Evergreen in our church family. This week we're going to look at the wall between us and sort of the vulnerability in grief. And you might be thinking, wait, that sounds kind of like a wall that I want up. But what I mean is this. Sometimes church can seem like a community or a place where everyone has to be happy, where the sun is always shining and you can't really express how you're truly feeling inside. But the truth is, we're not always in a good place all the time. Everyone has days in darkness. Everyone has seasons of grief, as we just talked about with Wendy. Now, yes, we believe in a God who has the ultimate victory. And yes, we believe that one day God will wipe every tear from our eye and there will be no more mourning or pain. But until then, we live in this already but not yet time. The kingdom of God has already arrived, but it's not yet come in full. And so we have in our lives pain and loss and grief. So this morning, I want to offer you a small demolition devotional about God breaking down walls to enter into that pain, loss, and grief. Now, I'm reminded of the story in John 11 where Jesus' friend Lazarus is sick. But when news reaches Jesus of Lazarus' condition, Jesus decides not to leave to see his friend for 2 more days. And Jesus tells the followers that he's with that the sickness that Lazarus has will not end in death, and that the whole thing is so that God's Son can be glorified. Now, Lazarus is the brother of Mary and Martha from Bethany, and by the time that Jesus arrives at their home, Lazarus has actually been dead for a few days. And what happens next is really fascinating. You see, as Jesus is approaching the town, Martha hears he's coming and comes to greet him, but Mary, her sister, stays home. Now, Martha says to Jesus, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give what you ask." She says, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Now Jesus responds with, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever lives by believing in me will never die." And asks her, "Martha, do you believe this?" Martha responds with a yes and verbally gives this perfect confession of belief. And it's a nice, clean story. Martha is grieving, but she says exactly what she thinks she has to say in that moment. It is a perfect confession of faith, what every good Christian is supposed to say, right? My brother died, but hey, our loss is heaven's gain. Now, I'm not bagging on Martha. Martha is actually us. Many of us were taught that people of faith can't be sad when a loved one passes because they're in a better place, that all things work for the good of those who love him. True as those statements may be, it doesn't always help us in that moment when we're heartbroken and grieving. There's still a hole in our heart. There's still a longing for just another day with them. So then Martha goes back to the house and tells Mary that Jesus is looking for her. And that's where we pick up our story. In verse 32, it says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Wow. Now, first of all, I don't know how these sisters ever got along because they're so different and seems like they're just kind of polar opposites of each other. Martha has this perfect confession of faith when she encounters Jesus. And then Mary comes and just collapses at Jesus' feet. No confession, just if you had been here, this wouldn't have happened. Now Jesus sees her and the others that are with her weeping, and he's deeply moved, and he starts to weep too. Now the Jews see this and say, wow, Jesus, he really cared for Lazarus. Nope. I mean, yes, Jesus loved Lazarus, but I don't think he was weeping because of Lazarus. I think he's weeping because of Mary. And in that one act of weeping, Jesus dissolves a wall. You don't have to recite the perfect Martha confession of faith in your sorrow. You don't have to have it all together. You can be vulnerable. You can be a mess. You can doubt God. You can be angry at God. You can be disappointed in God. And what is God's response to our messy moments of grief? Well, just as he did with Mary, he comes looking for us, and then he weeps with us. Martha may have had the perfect answer. I believe he's going to raise on the last day, but it was the messy tears of Mary that drew Jesus near. Wall demolished. Beloved, this Lent, may God break down your walls so that he can weep with you in your grief. Grace and peace to you this week and in your Lenten season. We'll see you next week on Palm Sunday.